The grand auction hall was filled with America's elite, businessmen, politicians, and socialites, all dressed in expensive suits and designer gowns. Champagne glasses clinked softly as quiet conversations buzzed through the air. A massive chandelier illuminated the room, reflecting the wealth and privilege of those in attendance. But in the center of the sandy arena, a German shepherd lay still, his ears low, his eyes empty. His name was Spike, and he had once been a K-9 officer trained for high-risk police operations. But after a serious injury on duty, he had been deemed useless and discarded. Instead of a dignified retirement, he had been placed in this charity auction, among thoroughbred horses, rare antiques, and luxury cars. The auctioneer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. Lot 42, presenting Spike, a highly trained police dog, exceptional intelligence, loyalty, and strength. Opening bid, $15,000. Silence. People exchanged glances, but no one raised their paddle. Then came the whispers. A washed-up police dog? Probably got slow after that injury. What would anyone even do with him? Spike didn't move. He had learned to expect rejection. The auctioneer, now visibly uncomfortable, tried again. Ladies and gentlemen, this dog has saved lives. Do I hear a bid? More silence. A few guests sighed impatiently. Others chuckled under their breath. And then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out. $500. The crowd turned to see a young man standing near the entrance. He didn't belong there, not with his worn-out denim jacket and scuffed boots. His name was Liam Carter, and he had barely scraped together the money to be here. The room erupted in laughter. Is this a joke? $500? You can't even buy a bottle of wine for that here. Kid, you lost? This isn't a flea market. The auctioneer hesitated. He glanced around, waiting for a real bid, but none came. With a resigned sigh, he slammed the gavel down. Sold. For $500. More laughter. People shook their heads. Liam ignored them all. He simply walked to the center of the arena and crouched beside Spike. For the first time that night, Spike lifted his head. His dark eyes met Liam's. At that moment, something changed. For months, Spike had been abandoned, unwanted. But this young man, this stranger, wasn't looking at him with pity. He was looking at him like he mattered. No one in that room could have predicted what would happen next. And soon, the entire world would be watching. The cold night air stung Liam's face as he stepped out of the auction hall. The laughter and whispers still echoed in his mind, but he pushed them aside. None of that mattered now. Spike walked beside him, his movements slow and cautious. He had been trained to obey, but there was something different in his steps. A hesitation, a wariness, as if he had learned the hard way not to trust too easily. Liam stopped by his old pickup truck, opening the passenger door. Come on, buddy. Spike hesitated for a moment, then climbed in. As Liam started the engine, he glanced at the dog beside him. There was something in Spike's eyes, something haunted. For a moment, Liam wondered if he had made a mistake, a memory buried in blood. 2 years earlier, the streets were dark and wet from the rain, illuminated only by flashing red and blue lights. Sirens screamed in the distance. Spike was on duty, his handler gripping the leash tightly. They had been chasing a dangerous suspect, an armed fugitive who had killed 2 officers the week before. It was supposed to be a routine takedown. It wasn't. Gunfire erupted from the alleyway. Spike lunged forward, his teeth locking onto the suspect's arm. But then, a sharp, searing pain. A bullet tore through his side. The impact knocked him off his feet. His vision blurred, his handler's voice fading into chaos. He tried to get up, but his body wouldn't respond. The last thing he remembered was the suspect breaking free and running. Spike had failed. And in the world of law enforcement, failure had a cost. Back to the present. Liam noticed Spike shifting uneasily in the passenger seat, his breathing heavier. A nightmare? A memory? The road stretched ahead as they drove out of the city, the neon lights fading behind them. Liam had grown up in a small town in Montana, miles away from the world of millionaires and auctions. He wasn't rich. Hell, he barely had enough money to fix the truck they were riding in. But that didn't matter. He had a feeling he and Spike were meant to cross paths. After an hour on the road, they arrived at a small ranch house on the outskirts of town. The place was old but well kept. A barn stood in the distance, and beyond it, endless fields stretched into the darkness. Liam parked and opened the door. "Come on, Spike. Welcome home." The dog jumped down, sniffing the air. He wasn't wagging his tail. He wasn't excited. He was waiting, watching, like he didn't quite believe this was real. Liam knelt beside him. "I don't know what they did to you, but you're safe now." Spike stared at him, his dark eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, he placed his paw on Liam's knee. It was small, barely a movement, but Liam understood. It was the first sign of trust. Neither of them knew it yet, but that night was just the beginning. Because someone from Spike's past was still out there, and they weren't finished with him yet. The wind howled outside as Liam sat on the porch, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. The Montana sunrise painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, but his eyes were fixed on something else. Spike, the German shepherd, sat a few feet away, staring into the distance, completely still. Too still. He had barely slept. Every time Liam shifted in bed, he could hear the dog pacing in the dark, his nails clicking against the wooden floor. It was like he was waiting for something, or someone. Liam took a slow sip of his coffee, then set the mug down. "You don't trust me yet, do you?" Spike didn't move. Liam let out a breath and leaned forward. "I don't blame you." A stranger in the dark. That night, Liam woke up suddenly. It wasn't a noise that had woken him. It was the silence. Spike was standing by the window, his ears perked, his body tense. Something was out there. Liam slowly reached for the rifle he kept under his bed. He wasn't the paranoid type, but he lived alone in the middle of nowhere, and Montana wasn't exactly free of trouble. He moved quietly to the window and looked outside. First, he saw nothing. Just the barn, the empty fields, the fence swaying in the wind. But then a shadow. Someone was standing near the barn. A tall figure, motionless, watching. Liam's grip on the rifle tightened. Spike let out a low growl. Not loud, controlled, like he was trained to do. Liam's heart pounded. Who the hell is that? He flicked on the porch light, but by the time he looked again, the figure was gone. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. Something about this felt wrong. Very wrong. Spike's instincts. Liam stepped outside, rifle in hand, scanning the property. "Who's out there?" No answer. The wind howled, rustling the trees. Nothing else moved. Spike stood beside him, his muscles tense, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Whatever had been there was gone now, but Spike knew it would be back. Liam exhaled and lowered his weapon. Maybe it was nothing. A lost hiker, a ranch hand passing through. Or maybe it was something worse. A name from the past. Back inside, Liam locked the doors and sat on the couch. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to shake the uneasy feeling in his chest. Spike lay down beside him, still alert. Liam sighed. "All right, buddy. Guess we both have things from our past we'd rather forget." Spike glanced at him, then rested his head on Liam's leg. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Liam looked at the old dog and frowned. "I think it's time I find out where you really came from." He reached for his laptop and typed in a name he had seen on Spike's auction papers. K9 Unit, Sergeant Victor Reynolds. As soon as he pressed enter, his stomach dropped. Because the first result wasn't about a decorated officer. It was an obituary. Victor Reynolds had been murdered a year ago, shot in the head during a raid. And Spike? Spike had been there. Liam's blood ran cold. Whatever had happened that night, whoever had killed Victor, they weren't finished yet. Liam stared at the screen, his heart pounding. The obituary was brief: Sergeant Victor Reynolds, killed in the line of duty. No suspects, no further details, just another name added to a forgotten tragedy. But Liam knew this wasn't just another case. Spike had been there, and now someone was watching them. He looked down at the dog lying beside him. Spike's ears twitched. his breathing steady but alert. He knew something. He remembered. Liam exhaled sharply and shut the laptop. "All right, buddy. Looks like we've got some digging to do." A lead from the past. The next morning, Liam drove into town. It was early, the streets still quiet. His first stop was the local sheriff's office. Sheriff Tom Grayson had been around forever. He knew things others didn't. Liam stepped inside, greeted by the smell of old coffee and paperwork. The sheriff sat behind his desk, flipping through reports. He looked up and raised an eyebrow. "Carter, didn't expect to see you here." Liam didn't waste time. "I need information on a cop. Victor Reynolds." Grayson leaned back in his chair, studying him. "That's a name I haven't heard in a while. He was murdered a year ago, and I think someone connected to it was snooping around my place last night." The sheriff's expression darkened. "What the hell are you mixed up in, kid?" Liam hesitated, then pulled out his phone and showed a picture of Spike. "I bought this dog at an auction. Turns out, he was Reynolds' K9 partner." Grayson sat up straighter. "That's Spike." Liam frowned. "You know him?" The sheriff exhaled, rubbing his face. "Yeah, everyone knew Spike. He and Reynolds were the best K9 unit we had. But after the raid that got Reynolds killed, well, things got messy." Liam's grip tightened. "What do you mean messy?" Grayson hesitated. "Reynolds wasn't just killed. The whole operation was botched. There were rumors that someone on the inside set him up. Spike was the only witness." Liam's stomach turned. "So why didn't they keep him on the force?" Grayson's jaw clenched. "Because after Reynolds died, Spike changed. He became aggressive, unpredictable. Like he knew something but couldn't tell us." Liam glanced at Spike, who sat patiently by the door. "And now someone's watching us." The sheriff sighed. "Listen to me, Carter. If someone really killed Reynolds to keep something quiet, and that dog is the missing link." He looked Liam dead in the eye. "Then you just put a target on your back." The attack. That night, Liam double-checked the locks on his doors. His rifle was loaded and within arm's reach. Spike lay near the entrance, his ears twitching at every small noise. The ranch was silent. Too silent. Then a creak outside. Spike's head shot up. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Liam grabbed his rifle and moved toward the window. A shadow moved by the barn. Then another. His pulse quickened. They weren't alone. A flash of movement. And suddenly, the porch light shattered. Liam ducked as glass sprayed across the room. Spike sprang to his feet, barking furiously. Liam crawled toward the door, rifle raised, heart hammering. Then the sound of footsteps, coming closer. Whoever was out there wasn't just watching anymore. They were coming for Spike, and they weren't leaving without him. The night was thick with silence, but Liam's pulse roared in his ears. The shattered porch light left the front of the house in complete darkness. Whoever was out there had done it on purpose. They wanted him blind. Spike stood near the door, his body rigid, his breathing steady but deep. He was waiting, calculating. Liam swallowed hard and moved toward the window, rifle raised. He could feel the weight of the weapon in his hands, the cool steel grounding him in the moment. He had been in fights before, but this was different. This wasn't just a break-in. This was a hunt. And Liam had the sickening feeling he and Spike were the prey. Then footsteps on the gravel. Slow, measured, deliberate. Liam's grip tightened. He exhaled through his nose, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. A shadow moved near the barn. Then another. Liam's stomach twisted. More than one. He turned toward Spike, who remained locked in place, his ears twitching as he listened. Then, without warning, the back door handle rattled. Liam whipped around, training his rifle on the entrance. His breath came shallow and fast. He counted the seconds. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be quiet anymore. They were letting him know they were here, and they weren't afraid. Breaking in. A second later, the back door burst open. Liam barely had time to react before a figure charged inside. Dressed in black, masked, armed. Instinct took over. Liam fired. The blast echoed through the house, sending the intruder stumbling back. But there was no time to check if the shot had hit, because another was already coming. Then Spike lunged. The German Shepherd moved like lightning, his body slamming into the second man before he could lift his weapon. A scream tore through the air as Spike's teeth sank into flesh. The man collapsed, thrashing, trying to fight the dog off. But Spike was relentless, his instincts taking over, his training kicking in. Liam took aim, his hands steady despite the adrenaline. The first man, still staggering from the gunshot, reached for his pistol. Liam didn't hesitate. He fired again. The man crumpled. The second intruder managed to shove Spike away and scrambled to his feet. But instead of reaching for his weapon, he turned and ran, bolting out the door and disappearing into the darkness. Spike barked furiously, ready to chase. But Liam grabbed his collar, holding him back. Let him go. They weren't safe yet. Liam turned toward the man he had shot. He wasn't dead, but he wasn't going anywhere. Blood pooled beneath him, his breaths ragged and shallow. Liam stepped closer, rifle aimed. "Who sent you?" The man laughed, a wet, pained sound. He coughed, blood staining his lips. "You have no idea what you just got yourself into." Liam's jaw clenched. "Try me." The man smiled weakly. "You think that dog is just some washed-up K9? You think they just threw him away?" His eyes flicked to Spike, then back to Liam. "He knows something. He saw something. And they won't stop until he's dead." A chill ran down Liam's spine. "Who's they?" The man chuckled again, shaking his head. Then, before Liam could react, his body went still. Dead. Liam's throat went dry. Whoever wanted Spike gone, whoever had killed Victor Reynolds, was still out there. And now they knew Liam was in the way. Liam stood over the dead man, his mind racing. The words echoed in his head. He knows something. He saw something. Spike sat beside him, his fur bristling, his dark eyes locked onto the lifeless body. Whatever had happened the night Victor Reynolds was killed, Spike had been the only witness. And now, someone was willing to kill to keep that secret buried. He had to move, fast. Liam grabbed his phone and called Sheriff Grayson. When the line connected, his voice was steady but urgent. "Sheriff, I just shot an intruder. There was another one, but he got away. They were here for Spike." A pause. Then, Grayson's voice came low and tense. "Lock your doors, Carter. I'm on my way. And if you have any doubt about pulling that trigger again, don't." Liam hung up and knelt beside Spike, running a hand over the dog's head. "What the hell did you see that night, buddy?" Spike didn't flinch. He just stared at the body, his muscles tight, like he expected more danger to come. And Liam knew it would. Minutes later, headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. Sheriff Grayson pulled up fast, stepping out with his hand on his holster. He took one look at the scene and let out a sharp breath. "Damn it, Carter. You really did step into something bigger than you can handle." Liam met his eyes. "Then help me handle it." Grayson sighed, glancing at Spike. "All right, but if we're gonna get to the bottom of this, we need to start with Reynolds' last case. The one that got him killed." He looked back at Liam. "And you better pray we're not already too late." Sheriff Grayson crouched beside the dead man, his face hard and unreadable. He checked the guy's pockets, searching for anything that could give them a name, a lead, something. But after a few seconds, he let out a long sigh and shook his head. No ID, no phone. Whoever sent him made sure he couldn't be traced back. Liam tightened his grip on the rifle, his pulse still hammering in his ears. This wasn't random, was it? His voice was quiet, but he already knew the answer. Grayson looked up at him. No, this was a hit. Liam felt his stomach tighten. Because of Spike. His gaze drifted to the German Shepherd, who still hadn't relaxed. The dog sat stiffly, ears twitching, nose flaring, like he could still smell the danger in the air. Grayson stood and dusted off his hands. Reynolds' last case was a drug bust, a big one, the kind that shakes up entire operations. Millions in cartel money on the line. But something went wrong. The official report says the suspect escaped. Reynolds was shot, and Spike was found injured next to his body. He paused for a long moment. But I never bought that story. Liam frowned. Why not? Grayson exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Because the suspect they were after, the guy who vanished that night, he wasn't just some street dealer. His eyes met Liam's, sharp and filled with something dark. He was an informant, and he was working for the DEA. The words sent a shiver down Liam's spine. This wasn't just about a botched police raid. This wasn't just about a K-9 unit being discarded. Spike had seen something that night, and now the people who wanted that secret buried were coming to finish the job. Liam sat at his kitchen table, gripping a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. An informant, the DA, a botched raid. None of this was a coincidence. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Spike wasn't just a discarded K-9. He was a witness, and witnesses were dangerous. His eyes drifted to the German shepherd lying on the floor beside him. Spike wasn't resting. His ears twitched at every sound, his breathing steady but alert. He knew something was coming. Maybe he didn't understand the details, but his instincts told him the truth. They weren't safe. Sheriff Grayson leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his face set in stone. Look, Carter, if this was just some cartel thug tying up loose ends, I'd say you had a fighting chance. But this, he shook his head. You're up against something bigger. If federal agencies were involved, if someone inside the system wanted Reynolds dead, then that means... He trailed off, his jaw tightening. That means you can't trust anyone. Liam exhaled sharply. So what do we do? Wait for the next guy to come knocking? Grayson's eyes flicked to Spike. No, we need to figure out what he knows. He pushed off the counter, stepping closer. There's a reason they want him dead, and I guarantee it's not just because he was Reynolds' partner. He saw something that night, something that got his handler killed. If we can figure out what it was, we might have a shot at stopping this. Liam rubbed his hands over his face. And how the hell do we do that? He can't exactly tell us. Grayson hesitated for a moment, then pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. There's a guy I know, used to be a top K-9 trainer before he left the force. If anyone can unlock the memories buried in that dog's head, it's him. He looked up, meeting Liam's gaze. He's in Billings. We leave at dawn. Liam glanced down at Spike, who stared back at him with dark, knowing eyes. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about uncovering the truth. And Liam had a feeling they weren't going to like what they found. The road stretched endlessly into the horizon, the sun sinking behind the Montana mountains in a wash of deep oranges and purples. Liam had been driving for hours, his grip on the wheel tight, his mind tangled with thoughts he couldn't shake. Victor Reynolds was dead. Spike had been there, and now someone was willing to kill to erase whatever the dog knew. In the back seat, Spike lay still, his head resting on his paws, but Liam knew better than to think he was relaxed. His ears twitched at every change in the road, his muscles tight beneath his thick fur. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't even close. This wasn't just a drive to a stranger's house. This was a step closer to the truth, and even the dog seemed to know it. Sheriff Grayson sat in the passenger seat, his phone in hand, scrolling through contacts. He had barely spoken since they left town, his expression shadowed by something Liam couldn't quite read. Finally, he let out a quiet sigh and muttered, "Hank Lawson." Liam shot him a look. "And we trust this guy?" Grayson didn't answer right away. He exhaled sharply, staring out at the passing fields, his fingers tapping absently against his knee. "I trust that he knows more than he's ever told anyone." He turned his phone off and leaned back. Lawson trained police and military K-9s for 20 years. The best of the best. The kind of guy agencies call when they need a handler for the toughest operations. Liam frowned. And then one day, he just walked away? Grayson nodded. Vanished. No explanation. No scandal. Just quit. Some say it was burnout. Others say he saw something he shouldn't have. He looked at Liam. The kind of thing that makes a man disappear before someone else does it for him. Liam's grip on the steering wheel tightened. This was bigger than he thought. They finally turned down a long dirt road, heading toward a small, isolated ranch. It was exactly what Liam expected. Quiet, unassuming, and worn by time. The house was small. The paint on the wooden exterior faded by years of sun and wind. A barn stood a few hundred yards away, its large doors slightly open, creaking with every gust. No welcome sign, no vehicles, no signs of life. But Liam knew better. Someone was watching. He cut the engine and the silence was immediate. Even Spike sat up, his head lifting, his dark eyes locking onto the house. Then the front door creaked open. A man stepped out onto the porch. Tall, broad-shouldered, his build solid despite his age. His silver hair was cut short, his face lined with deep creases of experience, but his eyes were still sharp. Too sharp. The kind of sharp that came from years of knowing exactly when something wasn't right. For a long moment, he didn't say a word. He just stared at Spike. The dog remained completely still. No growling, no tension, just recognition. Then, without even glancing at Liam, the man finally spoke. "You shouldn't have brought him here." Liam felt the weight of Hank Lawson's words settle in his chest like a cold stone. "You shouldn't have brought him here." The old K9 trainer wasn't just being cautious, he was afraid. And that terrified Liam more than anything. Spike stood motionless beside him, his body tense. His dark eyes locked onto Lawson as if he, too, recognized something deeper in the man's words. This wasn't just a meeting. This was the moment everything changed. Sheriff Grayson cleared his throat, stepping forward. "We need answers, Lawson. We don't have time for riddles." Lawson's gaze didn't waver. He gestured for them to come inside, his expression grim. Liam hesitated for only a second before following, Spike padding silently behind him. The inside of the house was small, cluttered but methodical. A place where someone had spent years preparing for something inevitable. Lawson walked to a shelf and pulled out an old, worn folder. He tossed it onto the table with a heavy thud. "I trained that dog myself," he said finally, nodding towards Spike. "He was the best K9 I ever worked with, and I know exactly what happened the night Victor Reynolds died." Liam clenched his jaw. "Then tell me." Lawson exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "The raid was never meant to succeed," he said quietly. "It was a setup from the start. The suspect they were after, the cartel informant, he wasn't just some low-level target. He was working for the DEA. And Reynolds found out too late." Grayson stiffened. "So you're telling me this was an inside job?" Lawson nodded. "Reynolds trusted the wrong people. Someone tipped off the cartel that the raid was coming. By the time they got there, it was an ambush." His voice lowered. "Reynolds never had a chance. But Spike saw everything. And he survived." Liam's stomach turned. "And now they want him dead because of what he knows." Lawson met his eyes. "Because of what he remembers. And because the people who orchestrated this, they're still out there." A heavy silence filled the room. Liam looked down at Spike, who sat patiently beside him, as if waiting for what came next. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was the key to exposing something much bigger than any of them